Hey there. One of our community members brought up a really interesting question, basically asking how something can seem impossible one moment and then possible the next. She actually finds herself in a really unique situation where she has this ongoing sort of neurological challenge that she has to deal with too, and yet has had again and again this experience of making the impossible possible. And it's a tricky question to answer because it can very quickly devolve into what I tend to think of as kind of like the woo-woo head game kind of crowd. But there's actually a really solid, concrete basis for understanding how we can move past some of our mental blocks, how we can do without these sort of self-limiting patterns that so many of us come up against. And the reason why is that we learn through movement. I mean, fundamentally, that's how we learn any of the significant things we do in our lives. Like, you actually have a pretty profound track record of making the impossible possible. There are countless things you've done that at one point you weren't sure you'd be able to do, right? Walking, riding a bike, asking someone out, maybe giving birth if you've gone through that experience, starting a business, whatever the case is. Your life is full of things that at one point you didn't quite know you would be able to do. And yet, here you are doing them. Feeding yourself, like at one point that was an impossibility, right? Now, what this points to is, and this came up in a training earlier in the week, an idea of our learned responses, our behaviors, our limitations, our perception. It's all ontological. And ontological basically means it's related to your development so far, your embodied development so far. So we've talked almost ad nauseum about the fact that a change in state in your body, a change in your ability in your body, can lead to a change in perception, right? The very common example that I always refer people to is that folks who are significantly heavier than others will find that when they estimate how tall a hill or a mountain is, they estimate that it's significantly taller than do the groups of lower weights. So, really clear example that the state of our bodies, the state of ourselves, influences our perception of things. So what happens then when we run across mental blocks, when we run across situations where we think, I can't do this, or this is impossible, or whatever the case may be? Now, it's worth knowing that depending on your situation, any number of things might seem impossible, right? There was a certain point for you where walking was impossible. There was a point in my not too distant past where walking was impossible because of a groin injury. For some people, maybe it's making six figures feels impossible. For other people, maybe it's making six figures in a month feels impossible. For some people, asking a pretty girl out at the coffee shop feels impossible. For others, whatever the case is, our lives are full of things that we consider limitations, and it's worth knowing that your limitations are not necessarily absolute limitations. Like, they're not necessarily limitations of biology or of physics or of any of that, right? And I don't want to get into the whole everything's quantum, all of that, because if anyone speaks with any level of certainty around quantum theory, they're lying. Even quantum theorists are uncertain. That's like the foundation of talking about it. So we're not going to get into any of that, but it's worth knowing that whatever situation you're looking at, a good chunk of people out there probably look at that as just like, it's just a Tuesday. Like, for a lot of people I talk with, whether it's getting over a trauma, getting out of chronic pain, scaling their business, doubling, tripling, whatever, for them it's like, oh my God, this is this big impossible thing. And I would look at it and say, no, it's kind of par for the course around here. These are the things we can do. So not everyone shares your limitations, which then makes us wonder, well, what have they learned that you haven't? See, quite often we confuse I can't do something with either I won't or I don't know how to do something. Which again takes us back to where movement can become such a profound tool for helping us navigate these mental blocks, because it actually goes to the root of how we learn things. We learn through embodied experience. You are going to be really hard pressed to learn anything without it somehow anchoring into the body. You could talk about the most abstract mathematics, theoretical, whatever calculus, clearly math is not my strong suit at this point, but all of that even is rooted on your ability to embody and count certain physical things through embodied experience. 1 block, 2 block, 3 block, 4 block. Now, even in counting these things, I'm not counting the things. Like, this is where we've got to get really clear that embodied experience is the foundation for learning anything, because I'm not counting these things. What I'm counting when I count 1, 2, 3, 4 is I'm counting movements of my eyes. That internal experience is how I count anything, right? Count the stuff on your desk right now. Count the pens you have sitting there. Count the books on your bookshelf. You will count the movements of your eyes relative to the environment. You're not counting the things in and of themselves. Now, I know that sounds like splitting hairs, but it's not. It's just not. Like, that's fundamentally the mechanism by which we can count. That's how we learn mathematics, is through embodied experience. There's a guy who wrote quite a bit along that line of thinking, and I believe his name is Caleb Gattegno, an Italian mathematician who explored different ways of teaching mathematics quite a bit, came up with this whole system around colored rods, basically helping children tap into a much deeper layer of learning rather than memorization or endlessly computing facts and figures. But I digress. All of this to say, embodied experience is the foundational way you know how to do any of the things that you know how to do. You had a lived experience of that imprinted you on some level. You learned how to cope with that challenge. So, to put it in perspective for you, I've got a series of clients who are working through this particular series of movement lessons I've developed that are frustrating. The point of these lessons is to be frustrating, because the lesson beyond the movements in and of themselves, it's like the movements will do all sorts of wonderful things like improve visual capacity, improve alignment of the head and neck, improve quality of breath, all of that. Like, the movement benefits are nice, but the lesson above and beyond all of that is, how do you deal with frustration? Because that is a much more important lesson than the way that your head moves around and whether you can cross your eyes and all this sort of stuff, right? The lesson beyond these lessons is, how are you in the midst of frustration and uncertainty? And I know, like clockwork, whenever I'm taking a client through these particular lessons, they will get angry at me, they will get frustrated at me, they will want to give up, they will check out, they will all of it. And I just let them know ahead of time, like, these things might come up. And as long as we can talk about this experience, you're going to be okay, you're going to make it through. Just let me know how this is going for you. So we talk about these, and actually a couple of clients were going through it earlier in this week, and they had this experience of, man, I got to this one lesson and I just checked out. Like, I did not want to do it. I got really frustrated. I got caught in a rush for the rest of the day, and then I had to stop myself 3 hours later and realize, like, I hadn't gotten anything done because I was in such a tizzy about this. Or another gal said something like, you know, I was frustrated, I wanted to quit, and like I poured myself a glass of wine and said, like, screw it, I'm going to come back to this later. I thought, yeah, sure. So is that what you do when you're frustrated? When you encounter something that you don't get or that you don't know how to do, what do you do in those situations? Do you check out? Do you lash out? Do you cheat? Do you change the task altogether? Like, how do you cope with frustration? How do you deal with your perceived limitations when you run into them? And again, this is where a movement lesson is such a beautiful petri dish for something like this, because it's not about the freaking movement. Like, I know I put a bunch of videos of me doing crazy whatever movements, partly because I know that's what works on Facebook. Like, people like to see that. Fine. Voyeurs, have at it. But the thing isn't, can you squat up and down on one leg? The thing is, what do you do with yourself on the way to that goal? So when we're going through these lessons, some people, they will automatically, even though I cue it, I say, don't reach to your end range. You know how far you can reach, do half of that. they'll go all the way and say, well, like, it hurt, it was uncomfortable, it was tense. And I said, you went to the end range, didn't you? And they said, well, yeah. It's like, okay. Are you frequently in the habit of pushing yourself to the point of failure? Like, do you get the joke? Do you see that what you just did in that movement lesson is what you have done in your business? It's what you do in your relationships. Like, these patterns aren't just in movement. They're not just in our businesses. They're not just in our relationships. The way you do things is ubiquitous. Like, you'll find so many parallels here. The other one that comes to mind is a woman I talked with earlier in the week who wanted to reach for this big goal, like had been doubling her gross income for years, and like every year doubled it. And she was looking at this next doubling, and I asked what her body experienced with it, and it was this collapse, this heaviness. And go figure, this is not the most motivated, inspiring place to work from. Like, her body's rebelling against that particular goal because she's pushed herself so much. Like, in the past, doubling revenue implied doubling the amount of work getting done. And if you're already taxed and collapsing, good luck doubling the work you're going to do in that point. Like, instead, you've got to find what you can let go of, where you can add more supports, where you can get a solid base underneath you. Then you can reach from there. But again, it's that embodied experience that is so informative as we go through this. So when you're looking at how to make the impossible possible, when you're looking at a particular mental block you have for yourself, a mindset challenge, what the hell do they call them? A limiting belief. If you're looking at any of this stuff, it's not something you can fix with head games. Like, until you get an organismic embodied experience that something has changed, like a felt sense that something has changed, nothing has really changed. You might get the aha, feel good kind of insight and then like carry on doing the same damn thing. Like, I don't know, anyone else ever experienced that? I know I have. It's like, wow, I learned this great thing at this workshop and I feel so good. And then Monday morning comes and I'm back to doing the exact same behaviors because nothing has actually shifted. I got this sort of intellectual thrill of having learned something. I got this insight and aha moment, but it hasn't changed my behavior. And if you've gone through that experience too, it's the same thing. You haven't changed your behavior. So when we're looking at this, we need to figure out, well, how does behavior change? Quite simply, behavior changes in one of two ways. Either a deliberate decision to change that behavior, which then, of course, depends quite a bit on your internal resources, your know-how, your understanding, or it necessitates a change in perception. Until you can actually see the world differently, which, go figure, hopefully we've already checked that box, that's an embodied experience. You can't see the world around you with anything other than your eyes. You can't feel the world around you with anything other than your hand slapping a bookshelf. Like, your perception is embodied. We can't pick those apart. We can't abstract that. It's inherently concrete. And so if you can find some means of changing your perception, changing your experience of things through embodied movement practice, the mindset things take care of themselves. Like, you're actually quite gifted at organizing efficient behavior. Our species wouldn't be here if you weren't. You're good at this if you can figure out how to get out of your head and into your body. And that's the challenge for a lot of people, because it's uncomfortable to do this. Like, anyone who tells you that fixing these things is going to be easy or painless or all of this, they're probably aggressively selling you something, if not outright lying. Like, getting out of your head and into your body is not always a pleasant experience, but it is a profound one every single time. So when we're looking at movement as a metaphor for how these things take place, you might consider how most people approach anything involving their body. And for most people, it is a punitive act. It's a violent, aggressive act on themselves. I feel like shit because I ate a pint of ice cream, so I'm going to go to the gym and work that off. Or, wow, I really let myself go on vacation and I look like a flabby sack of shit, so I'm going to beat myself into shape. A shape that I find acceptable because I can't accept myself as I am now. all of this, right? Movement, by and large, is punitive. It's go hard, it's go fast, it's go to the end range of motion, it's all of this. It's the pursuit of limits rather than exploring the quality on the approach toward those limits. Now that's actually where you learn the most, because if all you do is smack into your limits, it's like, that's my 1 rep max, that's the most I could do in that given set, all of this again and again, all you do is learn your limits. And there's not a whole lot of useful value in that. That's a real binary. It's like failure, success, failure, success. But there's all of the space in between there. Like, there's a lot of nuance involved in that, beyond merely, I failed, I did it. So as I was talking with a couple of clients earlier in this week, going through these particularly frustrating lessons, like, I'll admit I'm a little bit of an asshole on this front in that they were purposefully frustrating as possible. Because what I know is that when we can mobilize that frustration, if we can build up that agitation and bring awareness to what's happening with a person when they're frustrated, agitated, upset, all of that, like if they can stay with that, holy shit, that person's entire life will change. So I wanted to poke in these lessons. Like, that's what they were all about. We spent a couple of weeks on this in the Heroic Mind in particular. And so they were going through it, and I'm also not a big fan of just giving the answers. So when they ask questions, we kind of go through a little Socratic back and forth, like, well, what was that? How was that? What do you think? Da-da-da. All of it. Because what the hell use does it do to have my answer to a thing? You don't want my answers. You want your answers. So we've got to do the hard work of figuring out your answers. So they were saying, like, wow, I went back through it. I was frustrated the first time. I set it aside, but I went back through this morning, and I purposefully did it slower. I purposefully did less. And I purposely, took a lot longer on the lesson all in all. And go figure, I could reach a lot farther. Like, I tripled my range of motion on that thing. And I thought, okay, well, that's something. Like, what do you make of that? And the way she phrased it was beautiful. It was, when we nourish the competence of ourselves, rather than hit the limits again and again, if we can reinforce and leverage the competence, like the things that we can do, and build upon that, that's a much stronger foundation to get things done. So really, when you're looking around at a particular challenge, you might take a step back and ask yourself, have I just been banging my head into this over and over and over again? Have I been reinforcing failure? Or have I found some means of reinforcing competence? And it's when you reinforce competence in a given scenario, that's when you learn. Like, I get, you might fail and have all sorts of stories associated with that. Like, it's just a played out cliche coaching thing, because they don't even understand the whole ontological process involved. But, like, we don't punish babies when they fall on the way to learning how to walk, right? Like, we know that. It's intuitive. It's kind of like the cliche wisdom. You can't judge a baby for falling when he's learning to walk. But it's true, you can't. The difference, though, in those situations is that in our infancy, in our development, and this is where the lesson gets really profound for us now, all of that movement is fueled by curiosity and a yearning for what is yummy in the world, like what is delicious or tantalizing or interesting. I mean, the very first movements, you lie an infant on its mother's belly, like right after birth, and the infant will wriggle its way up toward the nipple. Like, the first movement we have is of reaching for something that is nourishing. Yeah? Something that, like, we want desperately. Not even a want, it's something we crave, like we must have. So how are you organizing your movement? Physically, like your body movement, but how are you organizing your movement through the world? Truly, like, it's worth checking in. Are you pursuing the things that are truly meaningful, joyful, yummy, nourishing, interesting? Or are you going through the motions, hitting failure, coming up again and again against a sense of incompetence or inefficiency or insufficiency? Like, the movement lessons teach us a lot about the quality of our pursuit, about the ways in which we use ourselves day to day. Because I will bet money that the way you go at it in the gym is the way you go at it in life. Or similarly, the way that you don't go at it in a movement practice is the way you don't there. Like, again, whether you push yourself and drive and it's go, 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 and it's all forward facing, like we know these people. They tend to be pretty successful in a lot of ways, at least on the outside. But we also know that they don't have a long shelf life in terms of an athletic career. They wear themselves down, they hurt themselves, they push past the breaking point. And I can't tell you the number of entrepreneurs I work with who have come to me because they are tired of that burnout loop. It's like they're really good at pushing to the breaking point, breaking down, building back up, getting to live that hero story again, pushing through it, breaking down, getting to... It's like a sick masochistic rush. I mean, but it's a culturally rewarded sick masochistic rush. So go figure, until we can find our own intrinsic rewards separate from all of the bullshit in our uncultured learning environment, until we can find a deep embodied experience of what is truly meaningful to us and nourishing to us, we're going to be at the mercy of all the other bullshit out there. So when you're coming up against these mental blocks, limiting beliefs, mindset challenges, whatever the hell self-sabotaging behaviors you're dealing with, it's really worth checking in. What's the quality, how are you doing this thing? The how is everything. What's the quality that you're bringing to this particular situation? Is it guilt-driven? Is it all or nothing? Is it push, all in, all out? Is it, masochistic rushing forward? I mean, it's worth checking in. Or is it a joyful approach? Is it fueled by curiosity? I mean, this plays out all the time in the way people learn. I talk with a lot of people who, self-proclaimed workshop junkies. They love learning, but they love it the way that a heroin addict loves the next hit. I gotta get another workshop. And it's like their lives they plan their lives around workshops. And it's like, that's not the same as loving something for the sake of curious exploration. That's a sense of insufficiency fueling that pursuit, rather than it's a qualitative shift. It's like an upwelling. It's a bubbling up over. It's wanting to reach out into the world rather than cling to something out there in the world. You can see it in my posture, right? The clinging versus a reaching. There's a different sense of intrinsic internal support associated with that. So, how are you doing the things that you do? When you look at all the ways that you get in your own way, how do you get in your own way? You don't need to figure out why. That's a wild goose chase. You're going to spend years obsessing over that, analyzing it, and not do anything about it, because you can't until you know what you are doing and how you're doing it. And that's why the movement lessons become so profound, because they put you intimately in the driver's seat. When you're going through lessons like these, you are subject and object. It is all about you and your experience. And you can't help then but bring awareness to your experience of things. It's like, oh, wow, that hurt. Wow, I keep doing that thing that hurts. Wow, I'm still doing that thing that hurts. What's it like to not do that? Oh, that's pretty pleasant. Okay. Huh. I mean, it seems, even verbalizing it seems too simple. It seems like a no shit kind of thing, but for most people that I talk with, these are the really earth-shattering things. A woman I was working with this morning had this just visceral gut-level reaction, oh my God, I can actually have what I want when I know what I actually want. We were going through some of you are going to know this and love it, the Yak Yum practice, right? So I introduced her to the Yak Yum. It was her formal induction into the jovial order of Yak Yumitude, or whatever the hell we want to call it. But we went through this Yak Yum practice, so she got very intimately connected to what was revolting, what she wanted to expel from her life, to create some distance from, and very intimately connected to what she wanted more of, more nourishment, more art, more time outside, more laughter, kids and all this stuff. And it was really profound, because she's lived half of her life thinking that she didn't know what she wanted. And half of her life thinking that even if she knew what she wanted, she couldn't get it. And that's how we make the impossible possible. Because for her, it was impossible to get what she wanted. And yet she had an instantaneous experience of getting what she wanted. It's like, oh, what do you want right now, physically? Well, to move my shoulders around. Okay, fine, like move shoulders around. And I know this seems silly and it seems too easy. It is, but you have to do it. And that's what makes it a little tricky for most people. They have to do it, not think about it or talk about it. So she, moved her shoulders, moved her hips, looked at the beautiful tree outside and said, okay, so that's what you wanted to do. How was that for you, to give yourself a little bit of what you want? Tears, like sobbing, cue the water. Like, for most people, this is profound. To recognize that they can, in fact, identify what they want and give themselves what they want. And if you're struggling with that, like whether it's in your business, whether it's in the way that your body moves and feels, whether it's in your relationships, you aren't stuck. Like, let me know if you're finding yourself ramming up against like these limitations, because they don't have to be there. You're, again, like I said at the very start, outside of breaking physics and biology, you're capable of quite a bit. You may just have swallowed a bunch of other people's bullshit and thought it was your own. Now, please know, if you do reach out for help with this, I'm not going to give you more bullshit to swallow. I'm going to help you like reject the bullshit that you already have swallowed. So it's not to be like guru mode, please don't ask for all of the answers. You're going to have to figure those out. I have no particular interest in feeding people the answers. That's stupid, disingenuous. And yet I think it's the mustache. It attracts the guru crowd who really wants something. Do you think that might be it? I think it might be it. So anyhow, what do you make of this? If we're going to wrap all of this up into a particular package, I would say you could take the guesswork out and let me know that you'd like some help. But like, by all means, we've got the Heroic Mind is something you could hop into. Shoot me a message. We could talk about that. 3 Days Deep is coming up next year. If you want like an in-person experience, those are going to be just out of this world. But if you'd like something to explore right now, it doesn't have to be complicated. It truly does not. And I gave a live training on this to some of the folks on my email list earlier this week. We talked about a 2-part process: attune and attend. Attune and attend. And if you can attune and you can attend, you will mobilize something in you. Like, you don't have to know all the answers. You simply need to know how to attune and how to attend. So what I mean by attune is you ask yourself the really simple question: what do I notice right here, right now? Apply this to any domain. Apply it to your body, if your body is the thing you would like to improve. Apply it to your business, if your business is the thing you'd like to improve. Apply it to a relationship, if your relationship is what you'd like to improve. Attune. What are you aware of right now? And attend. That's the next step here. And you ask, well, what do I want right now? Because you also have to attune to what you want. And so what do you want with your body right now? With your business next year? With your relationships for the rest of your life? What do you want? And in what small way can you give yourself just a bit of that? Again, this is a really simple process. Like, life is complicated enough. You do not need a complicated answer. You just need to do a thing. Anything. For a lot of people, it's like you need to do anything and stop doing a good number of things for other people. Some people do nothing. Other people do too much. It's like, do anything, like do something, and stop doing half of the shit you're doing. Happy to help you troubleshoot of which side of that equation you're on, but you know which side of that equation you're on. You don't need my help on that. But so attune and attend. And if you figure out how you might go about giving yourself a little bit of what you want, do that. Like, go, whether it's you want to make a cup of coffee. Right now, I want to drink. That's a need that I have attuned to. I have a delicious nitro cold brew here. I'm not going to tell you what company because I'm not a sellout stooge. People can pimp whatever products they want, that's fine. But then you check back in. Like right now, I can reattune and say, well, how was that for me to take that drink? It was delicious. Life's a lot better having had that drink. Like, it was delicious. It was coffee, always good. It was nice. It was pleasant to know that I could interrupt this little exchange here, and I could do that for myself. And so for you, how is it for you to give yourself some little bit of what you want? And then if you look at those big, gnarly limits that you had set for yourself, do they seem as big and gnarly, knowing that you can give yourself a bit more of what you want? If you look at those limiting beliefs, those can'ts, those impossibilities in your life, do they seem a bit less impossible, a bit more in the realm of the possible? Now, maybe they do, maybe they don't. What I know is that if you continue this practice of attune and attend, you could set a timer for 10 minutes every morning and go through that. It can be that simple. And you will mobilize something in you that knows what to do, because you aren't clueless, you aren't directionless, you aren't helpless. And it's just a clever game you've learned how to play over however many decades. Right? Animals know how to take care of their needs. Maybe you never actually learned how to feed yourself. Maybe you actually missed the train on a couple of fundamental social skills. I'm willing to bet you aren't as bad off as you think you are. I'm willing to bet that for whatever reason, life has been hard. Life is hard in a lot of ways. And when we have recurring experiences of life being hard, that reinforces our embodied perception that life is full of challenges. But I promise you, it is not always full of challenges. For some people, a tree out there might look like a challenging thing. Me, embodied experience of climbing trees, I see that as an opportunity to go play. It's not, I hope that doesn't sound like a blasé head game kind of thing, because I think it's much more profound than the mindset crowd really gives it credit for. But when you provide yourself an embodied experience of competence, of sufficiency, of capability, of attending to your own needs, you create a really significant shift. Like you set a profound process in motion. So that's more than enough to work with. You could spend the next year just doing that practice and get back to me in a year. Let me know how cool life is at that point. But again, if you'd like to fast track it, shoot me a message if you're curious about 3 Days Deep. No, I'll just put the link for 3 Days Deep in there. Shoot me a message if you're curious about the Heroic Mind. 3 Days Deep is in-person, immersion, all of that. Heroic Mind online. You could get started with it, hit the ground running. You would then forget what a New Year's resolution is because you would set so much change in motion. So let me know. I hope this has been helpful. I'll put the link underneath here, and we'll talk soon.